Court Gentry, the Gray Man, is back in the 14th novel to feature his story. This time, Gray Man will stop at nothing to free his lover from a Russian Gulag. Stay tuned. Ahead, I'll talk with Mark Greaney about Midnight Black. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Mark Greaney has a degree in international relations and political science. In his research for his best-selling Gray Man novels, he's traveled to more than 35 countries and trained alongside military and law enforcement in the use of firearms, battlefield medicine, and close-range combative tactics. The Gray Man story continues with Midnight Black. Mark, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be back.
Well, you're back with another in the series with The Gray Man. So tell us a bit about what inspired this latest novel.
Well, this is the 14th book in the series. They are all standalone novels. You don't have to read the first 13 to follow along here. But this is the story of my hero, a guy named Court Gentry, who's a former CIA paramilitary officer who has fallen in love with a girl in Russia. She's a former SVR, which is their Foreign Intelligence Service officer. And she's been targeted by the Russians. She's been taken back into Moscow and has disappeared. And Court is the only person in the West who thinks she might still be alive. So he is doing whatever he can to break his way into Russia, which is, of course, a police state and a very difficult place to get into and get around in. And so he has interesting band of Confederates, elderly people who had worked as resistance fighters during the Soviet Union days, and young revolutionaries in Moscow fighting against the Kremlin today. And while this is all going on and he's trying to find this woman that he loves, a very cunning colonel with the FSB, Russian intelligence, is trying to pull him into a trap in Russia to capture or kill the Gray Man.
Zoya is interesting in many different ways. Obviously, she's the impetus for him in this novel, trying to save her. So she's brought love into his life, but yet at the same time, now he has this other person that he cares about and is potentially a little bit of a liability because he would need to keep his emotions in check to keep himself safe, and it's hard to do when he's dealing with Zoya.
Yeah, he is really compromised, and a lot of his decision making is affected by, his desperation to find her and help her. I will say she's not a pawn in this book. She has a lot of agency in her own fate as well. So she's very, very involved. But I think the way that I've written this series, the last of Court's skills to develop, and maybe the weakest of Court's skills, was this kind of skill to trust somebody and to maybe even fall in love. And so he finds himself here very, very desperate. I wanted to write this as I was doing my research on Russia and what's going on there now. It just made me think back to all the Cold War novels that I grew up loving, the Le Carrés and the Clancy's and Frederick Forsyth and Nelson DeMille, all these guys that I was just big fans of. And I decided that this story would have that. It would have the kind of the sweeping emotion, but also the big geopolitics. There's John Wick level action. There's kind of everything in there. And it is all centers around the fact that Court is in love and will do anything he can to help Zoya.
Well, since you brought it up, research, tell us about the challenges that this novel posed for you, because you were needing to set certain scenes in certain places in Moscow. And even though most of us will never go there, you want to make sure you get the details right.
Yeah. So fortunately for me, I've spent some time in Russia back when it was safe to do so. If I went to the State Department has an absolute do not travel warning for Russia right now. And for good reason. If you were an American over there, you'd probably just get arrested and traded for somebody in the West, but you might be sitting in a cell for a couple of years before that happens. So it's a no-go zone, like North Korea and some other places I've written about. But fortunately, I have been able to go to Russia. And I went shortly before the war started, and I have thousands of pictures and videos and, of course, all my memories and notes and things like that. And I was able to incorporate that in there. Plus, I just do, I probably averaged an hour and a half of research on Russia, Ukraine, the war, Russian sabotage operations in the West, some sort of conspiracy theories, doing research on the various resistance groups inside of Russia who are against the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin. So it was something I probably would have been researching to some degree, even if I wasn't writing a book about it, because I am interested in that part of the world. But it was, yeah, I dug pretty deep into this story.
Now, one of the pictures we sometimes see of Russia is one of the subway stations that is very ornate. And I understand, part of this, at least there's at least one scene that takes place in the subway system. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, and a Russian subway system is the most beautiful in the world, and there's so many. You'll be in the city center, and of course, there's a lot of ornate stuff. It's all very Soviet era days, but big chandeliers and monolithic statues and statues of soldiers from the Great Patriotic War and things of that nature. But I've been sort of in the outskirts of Russia in subways, and they're still really amazing. But yeah, one of the key scenes in this story takes place near Gorky Park, near the river, and it's in multiple subway stations. Court is trying to evade capture inside Russia, and there's several groups after him, including this unit of FSB, special forces guys, and he has to sort of hijack a subway in motion and move through stops and get his way out of there. So I'd been to all these places. I, of course, had to do research because it's been a while since I've been there. But I did research on the movements. I spent most of a day in Gorky Park, and I wanted to work that into the story as well. So yeah, it's kind of a big, very Cold War-esque, Clancy-esque action pursuit scene that takes place right in the heart of Russia, not too far from the Kremlin.
And since you mentioned Clancy, for those who aren't aware of it, tell us a little bit about your background with Clancy and how you came to write some of his books as well.
Yeah, I was turned down by almost every editor in New York, and the one editor that took a chance on me was Tom Colgan, who at the time was Tom Clancy's editor and remained his editor until Tom passed. And I just had a couple of paperbacks out. I was a couple of years into my career, and he asked me if I'd be interested in writing with Tom, and I did. And they had me go to Baltimore to meet him and see if it was going to work out. I actually wrote a sample just to prove to them that I knew Clancy's work because I was such a huge fan. And then they had me work with him, and I wrote a book with him called Locked On in 2011. And we did 2 more books, and then he passed away, sadly. And then the family asked me to continue the series. So I did 4 after that. So I ended up doing 7 Jack Ryan books in 6 years. And it was not only did it change my career trajectory, but it definitely changed the way that I write novels and the depth that I go to in stories. So it was an amazing experience for me.
I'm talking with Mark Greaney about Midnight Black, and our conversation continues in a moment. If you're enjoying this discussion, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. And thank you. Well, this Gray Man series, as you mentioned, this is the 14th book in the series. So how do you keep it fresh? How do you keep coming back to this character and feel like you have something new to say?
That is the hardest thing to do, and that makes it sound like there's a risk that it won't happen. But I mean, it's the one thing I concentrate the most on early when I'm trying to conceive what I'm going to write about. I'm like, what's going to get me excited? What's something I haven't done before? Sometimes even I'll change the style of writing to some degree. I always sort of look at books a certain way. And for this book, once I kind of realized, I'm going to write this like my favorite books from the 1980s or 70s, a big Cold War era novel, although it's contemporary. Russia feels very much like it did during the Soviet Union days, to me anyway, from what I've read and what I experienced there. And I was like, okay, this is me paying homage to my favorite books when I first got involved in this. So that was just kind of a thing that I always had in my mind, that I was getting a chance to not recreate, but to, interpret that type of a book. So that was always very exciting. The whole year last year while I was working on it, I was very focused on that. And as I said before, I'm just very fascinated with this part of the world. I just do so much research out of my own interest and passion for what's going on in Ukraine and the plight of the Ukrainians, and Russia's increasing irregular warfare they're doing with the West, and all these things. And when you're a writer about current events and geopolitics and things like that, you see things in the world and you just really want to just shout them from the rooftop. So I'm writing the book a year ago going, no one's going to hear what I'm saying for a year, but that also makes you really like focused and passionate on getting it right. So it was a tough book to write. It took me, I was really late turning it in. But at the same time, I was very passionate about what I was doing.
Well, it sounds like you have the challenge of keeping yourself interested
Right.
in Court Gentry,
Yeah.
and also keeping the readers interested in this character. And part of it, as we've talked about in the past, is him evolving over time. Him getting involved with Zoya was a big change for his life. So as you look at those 14 novels, how do you see that he has evolved over that time?
I like to think about that. Each book has its own story arc with a beginning, a middle, of an end, and characters can't stay the same throughout a book. That's just like one of the tenets of being of writing fiction. There has to be some growth in the characters. So I have these individual story arcs, but then I also think of the big picture and how Court's changed over the years. A few books back, I wrote a novel called Sierra 6, which showed Court as a much, much younger man, and actually dialed back his personality to what he might have been like in his 20s. And that was interesting to me. But he has grown. I think I made him a lot more sort of socially closed off earlier in the series, at the beginning of the series, which was really cool for the first couple of books. But you start to bring in other characters into the series. The readers need that. I need that. And as you do that, you think, okay, you can't just have him as an automaton the whole time. So his relationships have like bloomed and blossomed. He's become maybe more hard edge, but the story still has a lot of levity in it, I think. Court is a sarcastic guy. He can be funny. The people around him can be funny on purpose or not on purpose. So I think I just always have to think about, I don't have an end game for people always say, how are you going to wrap this series up? And I don't know. I have a couple of ideas, but it might not be one of those. But I always want to see him growing a little bit, as any human would who was in their 20s and now in their 30s and hitting their 40s. So it's something I do think about a lot, and I want to put the right amount of it into each book.
Well, this is a thriller. It's fast-paced, as you've mentioned. So besides being an engaging read, is there anything else you hope the readers are going to take from the story?
For me, if I ever get beyond wanting the readers to be entertained, then I think I'm doing them a disservice, because I don't want to preach or anything like that. But I do write very contemporary stories about real geopolitical issues, which means you have to take a stance on them. This seemed like a pretty easy stance for me. I think what's happening in Russia is pretty bad. But of all my books, this was the first one where I told myself, I'm not going to try and anticipate where the world is going to be the day the book comes out, like I usually do. I'm going to write a slightly more hopeful world than I really expect to see. So in this book, there is a much more organized, let's say, and robust Russian resistance to Putin's regime. That exists in the real world, but a lot of those different groups are very compromised by their own ideological quirks and things that I couldn't get behind. But it's a little pure of heart in my book, and I thought that was okay. I wanted to make that something that readers can take away and get behind. Also, the West's willingness to go toe to toe with Russia. Russia right now is fighting a war against the entire West. We're just not fighting a war back with them, and we call it irregular warfare or destabilizing actions. But they're blowing people up and killing people, and that's pretty much war. And so in this book, we are willing to go toe to toe with them in a way that we aren't in reality. So I want readers to sort of have this kind of hopeful tone that some of this stuff can work out all right at the end.
Well, you have the Gray Man series. You write other books as well. So what's next for you?
Well, right now it's another Gray Man. I'm writing the 15th Gray Man book in the series. I'm going to go to Northern Ireland later this year, in a couple months, and do some research there. Some more research is going to be done domestically in the DC area. And I'm going to knock that book out. And next year, I'm going to write a different novel. It'll still be a thriller, but it won't be an espionage novel. So I'm kind of excited to expand my world just a little bit. It's not like I'm writing a whole different genre, but something a little more of a domestic thriller type. And I'm looking forward to doing that. So I'm staying busy, a book a year at least. Yeah.
A question for my personal curiosity here. I know that one Gray Man movie has been made. I watched it. I enjoyed it. Is there any chance we might see more?
There's a chance we might see more. I know that they are working on a second script, and that is sadly all I know right now. I was hoping, I think I'll probably find out the same as everybody else does, because that's how it happened with the first film. I'd heard rumors and rumors and rumors and rumors, and to the point where I wasn't even listening to them anymore. And I wasn't even listening when they said Ryan Gosling was going to do it. And then a few months later, it became public. So I'm hoping that they announce something pretty soon, but I don't know for sure.
This latest Gray Man novel is Midnight Black by Mark Greaney. Mark, thank you for talking with me today.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
If you'd like to purchase Midnight Black, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.